The letter in her hand shook like a dying leaf. "I changed my mind. Don't come looking." Genevieve Prescott stood alone at a stranger's gate in Montana territory, her entire life reduced to 2 carpetbags and a lie. The man who'd promised her a future had vanished before she'd even seen his face. But across the fence, another man watched, silent, weathered, carrying secrets of his own. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The dust hadn't settled from the departing wagon when Lawson Reed knew something was wrong. He'd been mending the north fence line, sweat stinging his eyes, when he heard the rattle of wheels, the sharp bark of a driver's voice, then the heavy thud of luggage hitting dirt. From where he stood, partially hidden by the cottonwood's shadow, he watched the whole sorry scene unfold at Malcolm Turner's property. The woman stood beside 2 worn carpetbags, her traveling dress gray with trail dust, her hat knocked askew. Even from 50 yards, he could see her spine go rigid, her chin lift in that particular way people hold themselves when they're trying not to shatter. The wagon driver, grizzled, mean-looking, thrust a piece of paper into her hands, spat tobacco juice near her feet, and climbed back onto his bench. "Wait." Her voice carried across the prairie, thin and desperate. "Please, there's been a mistake." The driver didn't even look back, just snapped the reins and left her standing there with nothing but dust and a locked gate. Lawson's hands tightened on the fence post. He should mind his own business. Lord knew he'd spent 8 years perfecting that particular skill, keeping his head down and his heart locked up tight where it couldn't cause any more damage. 8 years since Caroline had left him standing in almost this exact spot, her trunk already loaded on a different wagon, her face carefully blank as she'd said, "I can't do this anymore, Lawson. I can't be buried alive out here with a man who's already dead inside." She hadn't been wrong. But something about the way this woman just stood there, not crying, not calling after the wagon, just standing like she was waiting for the ground to open up and swallow her whole, made his feet move before his brain could argue. He set down the hammer and started walking. She didn't notice him at first. She was staring at the paper like it contained every answer to every question she'd been too afraid to ask. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 23, with dark hair escaping from pins and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. A face that might have been pretty if it wasn't carefully arranged into absolute blankness. "Miss..." She spun around, one hand flying to her throat. For a second, pure fear flashed across her face before she controlled it, and Lawson felt something twist in his chest. She'd been scared before. Recently. Often. "I'm Lawson Reed. I own the adjacent property." He kept his distance, his hands visible, his voice low. "Saw the wagon leave you here. Malcolm Turner, the man who owns this place, he's not here. Hasn't been for 3 months. Her jaw tightened. "I'm aware." She held out the paper, not asking him to take it, but not quite able to hold on to it either. Her hand was shaking. Lawson took it carefully. "Miss Prescott, I have reconsidered our arrangement. After reflection, I realize I am not suited to marriage at this time. I have left instructions with the driver to deliver you to my property, but I cannot in good conscience proceed with our agreement. I suggest you use the funds from your return ticket to establish yourself elsewhere. Do not attempt to locate me." M. Turner Lawson read it twice. The handwriting was crude. The words were crueler. "There's no return ticket," she said quietly. "I used everything I had to get here." He looked up. "Everything. Everything." She said it like she was reporting the weather, but her hands were fisted in her skirt. "I sold my boarding house room in Chicago, my winter coat, my mother's ring, my books." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I even sold my books. That's how desperate I was to leave." "What were you running from?" The question came out too direct, too personal. But instead of offense, something flickered in her eyes, recognition maybe. Like she saw in him the same kind of damage she carried. "My stepfather." The words came out flat. He decided after my mother died that I owed him. For room and board. For raising me. Her mouth twisted. He had very specific ideas about how I could repay that debt. Lawson felt his jaw clench. Did he? No. I left before he could. She wrapped her arms around herself. I answered Malcolm Turner's advertisement the same day I found my stepfather's hands on my bedroom door in the middle of the night. I thought anywhere had to be better than Chicago. I thought a stranger in Montana had to be safer than the man who'd sat across from me at Sunday dinner for 10 years. She looked at him, then really looked at him. I was wrong about the stranger part, but I wasn't wrong about leaving. The sun was dropping lower, painting the sky copper and rose. In an hour, it would be dark, and Montana nights in June could still freeze the breath in your lungs. You got anyone back in Chicago? He asked. Anyone who could wire you money? No. Simple. Final. No one. Lawson stood there weighing options that all seemed wrong. He could ride into town, see if the church ladies could find her a place. He could leave her here with blankets and food until Malcolm Turner sobered up enough to face his own cowardice. He could do a dozen sensible things that wouldn't involve bringing a strange woman onto his property. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "You won't be sleeping out here." Her eyes narrowed. I'm not asking for charity. I'm not offering it. He picked up one of her carpet bags heavier than it looked. I'm offering a roof, a bed, and supper. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. Tonight you're not staying out here alone. I don't know you. That's true. He picked up the second bag. But you know Malcolm Turner even less, and look how that turned out. For a long moment she just stared at him. He could see her mind working, weighing risks, calculating odds. A woman alone learned to read danger fast, and he watched her read him his scarred hands, his weathered face, his carefully neutral expression. Finally, she took a breath and nodded once. What's your name? He asked. Genevieve. Genevieve Prescott. Well, Miss Prescott, my ranch is just through there. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. That's about all I can promise. They started walking, and that's when Lawson heard it, the low rumble of thunder rolling across the prairie. He looked west and cursed under his breath. Storm clouds were building fast, already blotting out half the sky. We need to move, he said. Why, it's just... The wind hit like a fist, sudden and vicious. Genevieve stumbled, and Lawson caught her elbow, steadying her. Montana storms don't ask permission, he said. They just take. Come on. They half ran, half walked across the scrub grass, the wind whipping dust into their faces. Lightning cracked overhead close enough that Lawson felt the hair on his arms stand up. Genevieve was breathing hard, her skirts tangling around her legs, but she kept pace. They were 50 yards from the house when the hail started. Ice the size of marbles pelted down, stinging exposed skin bouncing off the hard-packed earth. Genevieve cried out, throwing her arms over her head. Without thinking, Lawson dropped the bags, shrugged out of his coat, and held it over both of them like a tent. Move! He shouted over the roar. They ran the last distance together, Lawson's arm around her shoulders, her body pressed against his side. He could feel her shaking from cold or fear or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Maybe all three. The porch steps. The door. His hands fumbled with the latch, and then they were inside, stumbling into the dim interior as hail hammered the roof like gunfire. Lawson slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. Genevieve stood in the middle of the room, dripping her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she started laughing. It wasn't happy laughter. It was the kind that comes when you're too tired and scared to do anything else. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until she had to bend over with her hands on her knees, gasping. I'm sorry, she managed. I'm sorry, it's just, I traveled 2,000 miles to be abandoned at a gate, and now I'm nearly killed by ice falling from the sky, and I'm standing in a stranger's house dripping all over his floor and... She stopped, pressed her hands to her mouth. The laughter turned into something else, something raw and broken that she was trying desperately to hold back. Lawson moved to the fireplace and started building a fire. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge the sound of her crying. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was pretend not to notice when someone was falling apart. The fire caught. Warmth began to fill the room. "There's a trunk in the bedroom," he said quietly. "Left over from well. There's a dress in there, maybe two. They'll be too big, but they're dry. You can change while I make supper." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Whose dresses?" "My wife's, ex-wife's." He fed another log into the fire. "She didn't want them when she left." Genevieve was quiet for a moment. Then, she left. 3 years ago. He kept his eyes on the flames. "Said she couldn't take the isolation. Said I was too quiet, too closed off. Said she'd made a mistake choosing Montana over St. Louis society." He paused. "She wasn't wrong. She left because you were quiet. She left because I couldn't be what she needed." Now he did look at her. "I couldn't give her parties and dances and conversation. I gave her silence and work, and this." He gestured around the sparse room. "Turns out, that wasn't enough." Genevieve's expression shifted into something he couldn't quite read. "I think maybe silence isn't always bad. Sometimes it's better than false promises." "Malcolm Turner made you false promises." "He wrote beautiful letters, talked about partnership and respect, about Montana being a place where people could start over." Her voice went hard. "Turns out he just wanted someone to manage his house while he drank in Helena. And when he really thought about it, even that was too much commitment." "His loss," Lawson said. She looked startled. "You don't know me. Maybe I'm terrible." "A man who abandons a woman at his gate without so much as a conversation isn't worth knowing. His opinion isn't worth considering." Outside, the hail had turned to rain, hard driving rain that drummed against the windows. The room grew warmer. Genevieve's shaking began to ease. "The bedroom's through there," Lawson said. "I'll be out here." She nodded and disappeared through the door. Lawson moved to the kitchen area and started pulling out supplies, salt pork beans cornmeal. His hands worked automatically while his mind spun. What the hell had he just done? Bringing a strange woman into his house during a storm, offering her his dead marriage's leftover dresses, promising her safety, when he could barely manage his own life. But even as he thought it, he knew he'd do it again. Because he remembered standing at that gate 8 years ago watching Caroline's wagon disappear down the road. He remembered the taste of dust and humiliation, the crushing weight of failure, and he wouldn't wish that on anyone. The bedroom door opened. Genevieve emerged wearing a simple brown dress that hung loose on her frame. Caroline had been taller, softer. This woman was all sharp edges and careful control. "It fits well enough," she said. "You can keep it. I should have gotten rid of those things years ago." She moved into the kitchen area. "Can I help?" "You don't need to. I want to." Her voice was firm. "I'm not much for sitting idle. What can I do?" They fell into an easy rhythm, Lawson slicing pork, Genevieve mixing cornmeal. The storm raged outside, but inside, the fire crackled and the smell of cooking food filled the small space. "How long have you been alone out here?" she asked. 8 years. Built this place myself after the old homestead burned." "Burned?" "Lightning strike. Lost everything, house, barn, most of the livestock." He didn't mention that Caroline had left 2 weeks later, that she'd taken one look at the charred ruins and said, "I can't start over. Not again. Not here." Genevieve was quiet, stirring the beans. Then, "My mother died of pneumonia when I was 17. My stepfather remarried within 6 months. The new wife didn't want me there." She paused. "I've been on my own since then. Boarding houses, factory work, whatever I could find." "That's why you answered the advertisement." "I wanted to belong somewhere." She said it simply without self-pity. "I wanted a home, Stupid, right? Trusting a stranger's words in a newspaper. Not stupid. Human. The meal came together: salt pork beans, Johnny Cake's coffee. They sat at the small table, and for a while the only sounds were forks against tin plates and rain against the roof. Finally, Genevieve spoke. "Why did you help me?" Lawson took a sip of coffee. Seemed like the thing to do. Most men would have looked the other way. "I'm not most men." He set down his cup. "And I know what it's like to be left standing in the dust wondering what you did wrong." She studied him across the table. "You think you did something wrong with your wife?" "I know I did. I was too wrapped up in the ranch and surviving. I forgot she needed more than just a roof and food. She needed conversation, companionship, something other than silence and work. Maybe she needed to be more than just decorative," Genevieve said quietly. "Maybe she needed to be useful." Lawson looked up surprised. "I'm not saying she was wrong to leave," Genevieve continued. "I'm saying maybe the problem wasn't that you gave her silence and work. Maybe the problem was that she wanted to be pampered instead of partnered." It was the most direct thing anyone had said to him in 3 years. Caroline's friends had whispered about his failings. The town had sided with her beautiful, charming Caroline trapped with that grim rancher who didn't know how to smile. No one had ever suggested that maybe, just maybe, she'd been the one who'd failed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but there was no heat in it. "Maybe not." She pushed beans around her plate. "But I know that I didn't come 2,000 miles to be pampered. I came to work, to build something, to be useful." She looked at him. Malcolm Turner's loss isn't that he didn't get a decorative wife. It's that he didn't get a partner. They finished eating in silence. Lawson washed the dishes while Genevieve dried, falling into an easy rhythm that felt both strange and natural. When they finished, he showed her the bolt on the door, the lantern by the bed, the chamber pot under the nightstand. "I'll be in the barn," he said. "If you need anything, ring the bell on the porch. I'll hear it." "Mr. Reed." "Lawson." "Lawson." She corrected herself. "Thank you. I know this is unusual, probably improper, but thank you." He nodded, not trusting himself to say more, and headed for the door. But her voice stopped him. "What happens tomorrow?" He turned back. She was standing by the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked young and scared. "Tomorrow we figure it out," he said. "But tonight, you're safe. That's enough for now." "Is it?" The question hung in the air between them. "It has to be," Lawson said finally, "because it's all I've got to offer." He left before she could respond, closing the door gently behind him. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. He stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the night sounds, water dripping from the eaves, his horses shifting in the barn, an owl calling from somewhere near the creek. Inside, he heard the bolt slide into place. The barn was dark and familiar. Lawson made himself a bed in the hay, his saddle for a pillow, his damp coat for a blanket. It wasn't uncomfortable. He'd slept in worse places. But sleep didn't come. He kept thinking about Genevieve Prescott, about the careful control in her voice when she'd talked about her stepfather's hands on her bedroom door, about the way she'd laughed in the face of that hailstorm, wild and broken, about her saying maybe she needed to be useful. Two people both abandoned, both standing in the wreckage of promises someone else had broken. He didn't believe in fate or second chances. But he believed in decent behavior, in offering shelter when someone needed it, in doing what was right, even when it complicated your carefully ordered life. Tomorrow he'd take her into town, help her figure out her options. Maybe the church could help. Maybe one of the shopkeepers needed assistance. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't involve her staying here, disrupting the silence he'd worked so hard to build. But even as he thought it, he knew something had already shifted. The house didn't feel as empty as it had this morning. The silence didn't feel as complete. And that scared him more than anything, because 8 years ago, he'd learned that hope was dangerous, that opening yourself up just meant more pain when things fell apart, that it was easier to live alone than to risk being gutted again. But Genevieve Prescott, standing in his kitchen in his dead marriage's leftover dress, had looked at him like she understood, like she carried the same kind of damage. Like maybe silence and work weren't failures, they were survival. Lawson rolled onto his side, staring at the barn wall. Tomorrow. They'd figure it out tomorrow. Inside the house, Genevieve stood at the bedroom window looking out at the barn. A faint light glowed between the slats, a lantern probably. Lawson Reed sleeping in his own barn because he'd given a stranger his bed. She should feel grateful. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt terrified. Because for the first time in 6 years since her mother had died and left her alone with a man who looked at her like she was property, someone had offered her safety without asking for payment. Someone had seen her at her absolute worst and hadn't turned away. And she didn't know what to do with that. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against the cool glass, trying to steady herself. The letter from Malcolm Turner was still in her pocket. She pulled it out, unfolded. It read it one more time in the dim light. "I realize I am not suited to marriage at this time." She'd read between those lines easily enough. He'd seen her photograph, the one she'd had taken at the cheap portrait studio in Chicago, wearing her one good dress, trying to look respectable and pretty and worth the train ticket. And he'd decided she wasn't worth it. Too thin, too plain, too poor. Not enough. It was a familiar feeling. She'd been not enough her whole life. Not enough to make her mother's illness go away. Not enough to make her stepfather see her as anything other than a burden or a commodity. Not enough to deserve safety or home or belonging. But Lawson Reed, with his scarred hands and careful silence, had looked at her like she was worth something. Like her not enough didn't matter. And that was more terrifying than anything Malcolm Turner could have done. Because what happened when Lawson realized she wasn't worth it either? What happened when he saw past the gratitude and the careful control and realized she was just damaged goods, a woman who'd run from her stepfather's groping hands? A woman who'd sold everything, even her mother's ring, out of sheer desperation. A woman who had nothing left to lose. Genevieve turned away from the window and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The quilt was soft, well made. Someone's hands had stitched every piece with care. A sister, Lawson had said. Not his wife. She wondered what Caroline Reed had been like. Beautiful, probably. Refined. The kind of woman who deserved parties and dances. The kind of woman who could look at a man and see failure instead of strength. The kind of woman Genevieve would never be. She lay down still, wearing the borrowed dress, and pulled the quilt up to her chin. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Montana silence settled over everything, vast and deep and absolute. In Chicago, there had always been noise. Footsteps in the boarding house hallways, factory whistles, street vendors, fights and music, and the constant press of too many people living too close together. Here there was nothing. Just wind and space, and a man sleeping in a barn because he'd given a stranger his bed. Genevieve closed her eyes. Tomorrow they'd figure it out, Lawson had said. Tomorrow she'd have to face reality. No money, no prospects. No way back, and no way forward. But tonight, she was warm. She was safe. She was sleeping in a bed instead of on the ground at Malcolm Turner's locked gate. And somehow in this vast Montana silence, that felt like enough, for now. Lawson woke to the sound of chickens raising hell. He was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, instinct taking over. Dawn was just breaking, painting the barn interior in shades of gray and gold. Through the slats he could see movement near the chicken coop, something low and dark circling the wire fence. Coyote. He grabbed his rifle and was out the barn door in seconds, moving fast but quiet across the dewy grass. The coyote was lean and desperate looking, probably driven down from the high country by the storm. It had its snout pressed against the wire teeth bared while the hens screamed and flapped inside. Lawson raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The shot cracked across the morning like breaking glass. The coyote dropped, twitched once, and went still. Behind him, the house door slammed open. Genevieve stood on the porch in the borrowed dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face white. "What coyote?" Lawson said, lowering the rifle. "After the chickens." She came down the steps, slowly staring at the dead animal. "You killed it." "Had to. They don't stop once they get the taste." He moved toward the coyote, nudging it with his boot to make sure it was dead. "Welcome to Montana." She wrapped her arms around herself, watching him drag the carcass away from the coop. The chickens were still agitated, clucking and pacing their small dinosaur minds, convinced danger was everywhere. "Does this happen often?" she asked. "Often enough." He propped the rifle against the fence and started checking the wire for damage. "Coyotes, foxes, hawks, rattlesnakes. Everything out here wants to eat something else." He glanced at her. "You sleep okay?" "Not really." She said it matter-of-factly. "Strange bed, strange house, strange man sleeping in a barn because of me. I've slept in worse places." "That's not the point." He finished checking the fence and straightened. "What is the point?" "The point is this can't continue. You can't give up your bed and sleep in hay. You can't—" She gestured vaguely. "You can't keep rescuing me." "I'm not rescuing you. I'm just—" He stopped, searching for words. "I'm just doing what needs doing." "And what needs doing today?" Her voice had an edge to it. "You take me into town, leave me at the church, and go back to your quiet life." Lawson picked up the rifle. "That was the plan." "Good. Because I won't be a burden." "I didn't say you were a burden." "You didn't have to." She turned back toward the house. "I'll make breakfast. Then we'll go into town. Then you can forget you ever saw me standing at Malcolm Turner's gate." She was inside before he could respond. Lawson stood there in the morning light, rifle in hand, dead coyote at his feet, and wondered how everything had gotten complicated so fast. Yesterday she'd been desperate and grateful. Today she was prickly and proud. He didn't know which version was real, or if maybe both were. He dealt with the coyote, tossing it far from the property where other scavengers could have it, then washed up at the pump before heading inside. The smell of coffee and frying salt pork hit him immediately. Genevieve was at the stove, her movements efficient and controlled. She'd pinned her hair back, tied an apron around her waist, and transformed his sparse kitchen into something that felt almost domestic. "Sit," she said, without looking at him. He sat. She served breakfast in silence, salt pork, fried eggs, leftover Johnny cakes warmed on the stove. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. They ate without speaking, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the tick of the clock on the mantel. Finally, Lawson set down his cup. "I didn't mean to make you feel like a burden." "I know." She kept her eyes on her plate. "But that's what I am. That's what I'll be to whoever takes me in. Another mouth to feed. Another problem to solve. The church ladies will be kind and charitable and find me work as a laundress or a cook, and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for their Christian mercy." Her voice was flat. "I've been grateful before, Lawson. I've been charity before. It doesn't feel much different than being property." He didn't know what to say to that. She stood and started clearing plates. "But it's better than the alternative. Better than being out on the street or going back to Chicago. So yes, take me to town. Introduce me to the church ladies. I'll be appropriately grateful and humble." "You don't have to be humble." "Don't I?" She turned to look at him. "I'm a woman alone with no money, no skills beyond basic housework, and no prospects. What else do I have to offer besides humility? You're smart, you're strong. You crossed 2,000 miles alone. That takes courage. It takes desperation." She dumped the plates in the wash basin harder than necessary. "And desperation isn't a skill, Lawson. It's just what happens when you run out of options." He stood, moving closer. "Then what do you want? Because I'm trying to help, but I don't know what you need." She stared at the soapy water, her hands gripping the basin edge. "I want to not be afraid." I want to sleep through the night without listening for footsteps. I want to wake up and not wonder if today's the day everything falls apart. Her voice cracked. I want to belong somewhere without having to earn it every single day. Lawson stood there watching her shoulders shake with the effort of not crying. 8 years of silence had made him forget how to offer comfort. 8 years of being alone had made him forget that sometimes people needed more than practical solutions. But he remembered Caroline crying in this same kitchen, remembered how he'd just stood there useless while she'd packed her trunk and left, remembered thinking that if he'd just known what to say, maybe she would have stayed. He didn't have the right words now either. But maybe words weren't what Genevieve needed. "All right," he said quietly. She looked up surprised. "All right what?" "All right, you can stay. For a while. Until you figure out what comes next." "I can't." "Not charity," he interrupted. "Work. I need help around here anyway. Garden needs tending. Chickens need feeding. House needs." He gestured vaguely. "Everything needs something. You work, I'll provide room and board. Fair exchange." She turned to face him, fully suspicion and hope warring in her expression. "Why would you do that?" "Because I remember what it's like to need somewhere to belong. And because—" He stopped, then made himself continue. "Because maybe this place needs someone else in it. Maybe I've been alone too long. People will talk. Let them. They'll assume. Let them assume." He met her eyes. "I'm offering you work and shelter, Genevieve. Nothing more. You'll sleep in the bedroom. I'll sleep in the barn. You'll earn your keep, and in return, you'll have time to figure out your next move. No church ladies. No charity. No gratitude required." She studied him for a long moment. He could see her mind working, looking for the trap, the hidden cost, the moment when he'd demand payment for his kindness. "And when I want to leave," she asked, "you leave. No questions asked. Just like that. Just like that." She turned back to the wash basin, her hands moving through the soapy water. "I don't understand you, Lawson Reed." "I don't understand myself most days." He grabbed a dish towel. "But I know loneliness when I see it. And I know that sometimes the only thing worse than being alone is being surrounded by people who see you as a problem to solve." They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less tense. More tentative. Like they were both feeling their way through unfamiliar territory. When they finished, Genevieve dried her hands and turned to him. "Show me what needs doing." So he did. He showed her the garden, a small plot behind the house where vegetables struggled against the harsh climate. Showed her which plants were worth saving and which were lost causes. Taught her how to tell the difference between weeds and wild herbs. She listened carefully, asked smart questions, and didn't complain when her borrowed dress got dirty. He showed her the chickens, stubborn, mean-tempered birds that pecked and squawked but laid decent eggs. Showed her how to scatter feed, how to collect eggs without getting pecked to death, how to check for signs of illness or predators. She laughed when one particularly aggressive hen went after her skirts, and the sound surprised them both. He showed her the barn, where he kept his 2 horses, where he stored hay and grain, where the milk cow liked to hide when she was feeling contrary. Genevieve ran her hand along one horse's nose, gentle and sure, and the animal leaned into her touch. "You know horses?" he asked. "My grandfather had a farm, before he died, before we moved to Chicago." She stroked the horse's neck. "I used to help in the stables. I loved it, the smell, the quiet, the way horses don't lie to you." "Unlike people." "Unlike people," she agreed. They worked through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Lawson found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining, teaching, pointing out the small details that made ranch life work. Genevieve absorbed it all like she was memorizing scripture, filing away each piece of information for later use. By noon, they were both dirty, sweating, and hungry. They ate a quick lunch of bread and cheese on the porch steps, watching clouds build in the west. "Another storm coming?" Genevieve asked. "Maybe, maybe not. Weather out here changes fast." He bit into his bread. You scared of storms? No, I like them actually. All that power and noise, it's honest. No pretending to be something it's not. He glanced at her. You do a lot of pretending. I did. In Chicago, in the boarding house at the factory. Always pretending to be smaller, quieter, less threatening. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. Pretending I didn't notice when the foreman's eyes followed me. Pretending I didn't hear what the other women said about girls who lived alone. Pretending I wasn't terrified every single day. You don't have to pretend here. Don't I? I'm living in a stranger's house, sleeping in his bed, wearing his dead wife's clothes. If that doesn't require pretending, I don't know what does. Lawson was quiet for a moment. Then, she's not dead. Just dead to me. Your wife. Ex-wife. Caroline. He said the name like it tasted bitter. She's in St. Louis now, remarried some banker who can give her all the parties and conversation she wanted. Do you miss her? No. He said it without hesitation. I miss who I thought she was. I miss believing someone could be happy here. But I don't miss her. Genevieve rested her chin on her knees. Malcolm Turner wrote me letters for 6 months. Beautiful letters. He talked about building a life together, about partnership and respect. About Montana being a place where the past didn't matter. She laughed quietly. I fell in love with those letters. With the idea of a man who saw me as an equal instead of a burden or a commodity. And then you got here and found out it was all lies. Not lies exactly. More like wishful thinking. He wanted to want those things. He just didn't actually want them. She looked at him. Is that worse? That he genuinely meant it when he wrote those letters, but when it came time to follow through, he couldn't. I don't know, maybe. Lawson stood brushing crumbs from his pants. But it doesn't matter now. He made his choice, and you made yours. Did I make a choice? You're here, aren't you? You could have gotten back on that wagon, could have demanded the driver take you back to town, but you didn't. She stood facing him. I didn't have any money for the driver. You could have figured something out, but you chose to trust me instead. He held her gaze. That was a choice, Genevieve. Maybe the first real choice you've made in a long time. She opened her mouth to respond, but thunder rumbled in the distance, cutting her off. They both looked west. The clouds were definitely building now, dark and heavy. Storm's coming for sure, Lawson said. We should get the animals secured. They spent the next hour preparing, bringing the horses into the barn, securing the chicken coop, making sure everything was battened down. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and ozone. Lightning flickered on the horizon. They were closing the barn door when the first drops hit fat and cold and hard. Within seconds, it turned into a downpour, soaking them both before they could run for the house. This time, there was no hail, no drama. Just rain, steady and relentless, turning the yard into mud and the world into gray sheets of water. Inside, Genevieve stood dripping on the floor again, laughing. Does this happen every day? Welcome to Montana, Lawson said, where the weather tries to kill you twice before breakfast. She pushed wet hair out of her face. I should change. There's more dresses in the trunk. Help yourself. He moved to build up the fire. I'll heat water for coffee. She disappeared into the bedroom, and Lawson stood there in his wet clothes, staring at the fire, and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He'd offered her work and shelter, told himself it was practical, necessary, the decent thing to do. But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that this morning, waking up knowing someone else was in the house had felt different. Not bad different. Just different. The silence had felt less heavy. The solitude had felt less absolute. And that scared him. Because 8 years ago he'd learned that needing someone was dangerous. That opening yourself up meant giving someone the power to destroy you. That it was safer to be alone than to risk that kind of pain again. But Genevieve Prescott, standing in his kitchen laughing about Montana weather, made him wonder if maybe safety wasn't the same thing as living. The bedroom door opened. She emerged in a different dress, dark blue, this time still too big, but somehow more fitting than the brown one. She'd towel-dried her hair, and it hung in damp waves around her shoulders. "This one fits better," she said. "Keep them all. I should have gotten rid of them years ago." She moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "Why didn't you?" "Laziness mostly. Didn't seem worth the effort." "That's not true." She glanced at him. "You keep them because getting rid of them would mean admitting she's really gone. That the marriage is really over. That you failed." The words hit harder than they should have. "You don't know anything about it." "Don't I?" "I kept my mother's ring for 5 years after she died, even when I was starving, even when selling it would have meant the difference between eating and not eating. I kept it because letting it go meant admitting she was really gone. That I was really alone." She turned to face him fully. "I only sold it to buy the train ticket here, and I cried for 3 days afterward." Lawson stared at her, this woman who'd appeared at his gate yesterday, carrying nothing but 2 carpet bags and a lifetime of damage. This woman who saw through his carefully constructed walls like they were made of glass. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "About your mother. About the ring." "I'm not." She said it firmly. Because keeping that ring was keeping me stuck. Holding on to her memory was keeping me from moving forward. And yes, selling it hurt, but it also freed me. She paused. "Maybe you need to let go of those dresses, Lawson. Maybe you need to admit that Caroline leaving wasn't your failure. It was just what happened. Easy to say. Nothing about this is easy." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But staying stuck isn't the same as staying safe. I learned that the hard way." They stood there in the firelight, rain hammering the roof, and Lawson felt something shift in his chest. Some old calcified thing starting to crack. "I'll burn them," he said. "The dresses. Tomorrow when the rain stops, I'll burn them." Genevieve smiled a small, sad smile. "Good." The afternoon stretched into evening. The rain continued steady and soaking. They made supper together, venison stew from meat Lawson had in the cold cellar, biscuits that Genevieve made from scratch. She moved around the kitchen like she'd been doing it for years, and he found himself watching her, the efficient way she worked, the small frown of concentration when she kneaded dough, the satisfied sound she made when the biscuits came out perfect. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "Sorry, just you're good at this." "I worked in a boarding house kitchen for 2 years. You learn fast when the cook has a wooden spoon and a temper." She set the biscuits on the table. "Eat before they get cold." They ate, and this time the silence was comfortable. Easy. Like they'd been sharing meals for months instead of days. After dinner, Genevieve washed dishes while Lawson dried. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and through the window they could see the last light fading from the sky. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "How long have you been here?" 10 years total. Built the original homestead with my father and brother. They went back east after a few bad winters, said Montana was too hard, too lonely. I stayed." He set a plate on the shelf. "Met Caroline 2 years later. She was visiting her aunt in town and I..." He stopped. "I thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." "What happened?" "I courted her the only way I knew how. Honest, direct. I told her what life here would be like: hard work, isolation, long winters. She said she didn't care, said she wanted adventure, wanted to be a pioneer woman." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out there's a difference between the romance of pioneer life and the reality of it." "How long were you married?" 3 years. First year was good, or I thought it was. She kept busy, seemed happy. Second year she started going into town more, spending time with the ladies' social club, talking about how nice it would be to live somewhere with culture and society. Third year, he paused. Third year, the homestead burned. Lightning strike during a dry spell. We lost almost everything. And she left. 2 weeks later, said she couldn't start over. Said she'd given Montana a fair chance, and it had broken her. He set down the towel. Said I'd broken her. Genevieve turned off the water, drying her hands. Did you love her? I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of not being alone more than I loved her. He met her eyes. Is that terrible? No, it's honest. She hung the towel carefully. I don't think I loved Malcolm Turner either. I loved the promise of safety, the promise of belonging. But the man himself, I never knew him. Just words on paper. We're a pair, aren't we? Both chasing ghosts? Maybe. Or maybe we're both just learning what we actually need instead of what we think we're supposed to want. Thunder rumbled closer now. The drizzle turned back into rain, and Lawson moved to check the fire, adding another log. The room filled with warmth and flickering shadows. I should let you sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a full day if this rain keeps up. But Genevieve didn't move toward the bedroom. Instead, she sat in one of the chairs by the fire, tucking her feet up under her skirts. Tell me something true, Lawson. What do you mean? Something true. Something you don't usually tell people. She looked at him. I told you about my stepfather. About selling my mother's ring. Now you tell me something. He hesitated, then sat in the other chair. The fire crackled between them. I'm scared, he said finally. All the time. Scared the ranch will fail. Scared I'll end up like my father, broken and bitter, blaming Montana for my own failures. Scared that Caroline was right, that I am too closed off, too damaged to let anyone in. He stared at the flames. And I'm scared that if I do let someone in, they'll leave too. And next time it'll destroy me completely. Genevieve was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm scared too. Scared that no matter where I go or what I do, I'll always be running. Always be that girl standing at a locked gate with nowhere to go. Scared that I'm not strong enough to build a real life. Scared that I'm only good at surviving, not living. They sat in the firelight, two scared, damaged people who'd somehow ended up in the same place at the same time. Maybe, Genevieve said softly, we can be scared together, just for a while. Lawson looked at her, really looked at her, at the dark hair and creek water eyes, at the borrowed dress and determined chin, at this woman who'd crossed 2,000 miles alone and was still standing. Yeah, he said, maybe we can. The fire burned low, the rain continued, and somewhere in the warmth and the quiet and the honest words, something fragile began to grow. Not love, not yet, but something more important. Trust. The rain stopped 3 days later, leaving the world washed clean and impossibly green. Genevieve woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the sound of Lawson already working in the yard. She dressed quickly in the blue dress, her dress, now she'd started thinking of it, and pinned her hair back with more confidence than she'd felt that first morning. In the kitchen, she found coffee already made and a note scrawled on a scrap of paper. Gone to check fence lines, back by noon, help yourself to breakfast. She stood there holding the note, something warm uncurling in her chest. Not because of the words themselves, but because he'd thought to leave them. Because he'd anticipated that she'd wonder where he was. Because after 3 days, they'd fallen into something that felt almost like routine. She made herself breakfast eggs from the hens she'd learned to outwit bread toasted over the fire, and ate standing at the window, watching the prairie steam in the morning sun. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and empty and beautiful in a way that should have felt lonely, but somehow didn't. After breakfast, she tackled the garden with the determination of someone trying to prove something. The weeds had taken advantage of the rain, and she worked methodically through the rows, her hands getting dirty, her back starting to ache. But it was good ache, honest ache, the kind that came from building something instead of just surviving. She was elbow-deep in tomato plants when she heard hoofbeats. Lawson rode up on his bay mare, and even from a distance Genevieve could see something was wrong. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. He dismounted in one smooth motion and tied the horse to the porch rail with quick, angry movements. "What happened?" she asked, standing and brushing dirt from her skirts. "Malcolm Turner." He bit the name out like a curse. Showed up at the north property line. Drunk as hell and twice as mean. Genevieve felt her stomach drop. What did he want? You. Lawson's eyes were hard. Said he'd heard you were here. Said he'd changed his mind about the arrangement. Said he wanted to talk to you about giving things another try. He's 3 days too late. That's what I told him. Lawson moved past her toward the house. Among other things. She followed him inside where he poured himself coffee with hands that shook slightly. What did you say to him? I told him you weren't interested. I told him to go back to Helena and his whiskey and leave you alone. He set down the cup hard enough that coffee slopped over the rim. He didn't take it well. Lawson, what did you do? Nothing he didn't have coming. He turned to face her. He called you names, Genevieve, said things about you that... He stopped, his jaw working. I told him if he ever set foot on my property again, I'd make sure he regretted it. She should have been scared. Should have been worried about consequences and reputations and what would happen if Malcolm Turner decided to make trouble. But instead, she felt something fierce and bright bloom in her chest. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked surprised. You're not angry. Why would I be angry? You defended me. You stood up to a drunk, cruel man on my behalf. She moved closer. No one's ever done that before. Your stepfather had friends, had respectability, had the law on his side because he was family and I was just a girl making accusations. Her voice hardened. Malcolm Turner is a coward and a drunk, and you told him exactly what he needed to hear. Lawson studied her face. He might come back. He might cause trouble. Let him try. She said it with more confidence than she felt. I'm not afraid of Malcolm Turner. I'm not afraid anymore. It wasn't entirely true. Fear still lived in her bones, woke her in the night, made her check the locks twice before bed. But standing in Lawson's kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows, she felt something shift. Something hard and defensive starting to soften. Good, Lawson said, because he's not worth being afraid of. They fell into an easier silence, and Genevieve went back to the garden while Lawson worked on fence repairs closer to the house. She could feel him watching her periodically, making sure she was all right, and instead of feeling trapped or observed, she felt protected. By noon, they were both hungry and tired. They ate lunch on the porch steps again, and Genevieve found herself studying Lawson's profile, the hard line of his jaw, the sun-weathered skin, the way his eyes never quite stopped moving, always watching, always alert. What are you thinking? He asked without looking at her. That you're different than I expected. How so? Malcolm's letters painted Montana men as rough but romantic. Strong, silent types who'd sweep a woman off her feet with grand gestures. She smiled slightly. You're not like that at all. Sorry to disappoint. You didn't. You're better. She set down her plate. You're real. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't pretend things are easy when they're hard. And you... She paused, searching for words. You see me. Not who you want me to be. Just who I am. Lawson turned to look at her fully. And who are you, Genevieve Prescott? I don't know yet. She said it honestly. I've spent so long being what other people needed that I'm not sure who I am when no one's watching. But I think... She took a breath. I think I'm someone who's tired of running. Someone who wants to build something instead of just surviving. Then build it here. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility and danger. I've only been here 3 days, she said carefully. I know, and if you want to leave, you can. I meant what I said about that. He set down his own plate. But if you want to stay, if you want to figure out who you are when no one's demanding you be something else, you can do that here too. People will talk. Let them. They'll assume we're improper. Are we? He met her eyes. I sleep in the barn. You sleep in the house. We work together during the day and keep to ourselves at night. What's improper about that? The fact that everyone will think it's improper. I stopped caring what people think a long time ago. He stood brushing crumbs from his pants. Caroline taught me that lesson well. People talked when she left. Said I must have been cruel or inadequate or cold. Said she was too good for a man like me. Said I'd driven her away with my silence and my stubbornness. He looked out at the prairie. And maybe they were right. Maybe I did. But I'm done living my life based on what other people think I should be. Genevieve stood too. Then I'll stay, for now, until I figure out what comes next. Fair enough. They went back to work, but something had shifted between them again. Something unspoken, but understood. They were choosing to build something together, even if neither of them knew exactly what that something was yet. The afternoon passed in comfortable rhythm. Genevieve worked the garden until her back screamed, then moved to the chicken coop to collect eggs. The hens had started recognizing her, and while they still pecked occasionally, it felt more like habit than genuine aggression. She was reaching into the last nest box when she heard a horse approaching. Her whole body went tense and she spun around, egg still in hand, ready to run or fight or scream. But it wasn't Malcolm Turner. It was a woman. She sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle, wearing a simple riding dress and a wide-brimmed hat. She was maybe 40, with sun-browned skin and eyes that took in everything at once. When she spotted Genevieve, she smiled. "You must be the mail-order bride everyone's talking about." Genevieve set the egg carefully in her basket. Word travels fast. In Montana, like wildfire. The woman dismounted and tied her horse next to Lawson's. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I own the property 2 miles east. Heard Lawson Reed finally got himself some company and had to come see for myself." We're not. Genevieve stopped, unsure how to explain. "Not together, I figured." Sarah moved closer, her eyes shrewd, but not unkind. "Man like Lawson Reed doesn't do anything improper. Too honorable for his own good, that one." She looked Genevieve up and down. "But you're here, which means something happened. And knowing Malcolm Turner's reputation, I can guess what." Genevieve felt defensive walls slam into place. "I don't need charity." "Good, because I'm not offering any," Sarah grinned. "I'm offering information, and maybe friendship if you're interested." "What kind of information?" "The kind that might help you survive Montana." Sarah gestured toward the house. "Lawson around. Working the north fence line." "Good. Then we can talk without him hovering like a nervous mother hen." She headed for the porch without waiting for invitation. "Come on. I brought biscuits and gossip, and both are better shared." Genevieve hesitated, then followed. Something about Sarah Mitchell felt trustworthy, or at least honest. And after 3 days of just Lawson for company, another woman's presence felt almost shocking. They sat on the porch steps, and Sarah produced a cloth-wrapped bundle from her saddlebag. Inside were biscuits that smelled like heaven and a small jar of honey. "Eat," Sarah commanded. "You look half-starved." Genevieve took a biscuit, and the first bite made her want to weep. "These are incredible." "Family recipe. My grandmother's grandmother brought it from Tennessee." Sarah took one for herself. "Now, tell me what really happened with Malcolm Turner." So Genevieve did. Not everything, not the parts about her stepfather or the desperation or the fear, but enough. The advertisement, the letters, the abandonment at the gate, Lawson's unexpected kindness. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When Genevieve finished, she nodded slowly. "Malcolm Turner's a fool and a coward. Always has been, probably always will be." She bit into her biscuit. "But Lawson Reed? He's one of the good ones. Stubborn as hell, and quieter than a church mouse, but solid. Decent." "I know." "Do you?" Sarah studied her. "Because here's what you need to understand about Montana, about this territory, about surviving out here. It's not like Chicago or wherever you came from. Out here, people are spread thin. We don't have the luxury of keeping to ourselves, of ignoring our neighbors when they need help. We survive by working together." "I understand that." I don't think you do. Not yet. Sarah leaned forward. There are maybe 20 families within riding distance of here. 20 families in hundreds of square miles. And every single one of them will have heard about you by now. They'll have opinions, some good, some bad, most just curious. And what you do next matters. What do you mean? I mean you have a choice. You can hide out here on Lawson's ranch, keep your head down, try to be invisible. And maybe that works. Maybe people forget about you, move on to the next bit of gossip. Sarah's eyes were serious. Or you can claim your place, come into town, meet people. Show them you're not some scandalous woman causing trouble, just someone trying to build a life. Genevieve felt her stomach twist. I'm not good with people. Neither is Lawson, and he's managed for 10 years. Sarah smiled. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but if you want to stay here, if you want this to be home, instead of just a hiding place, you need to show your face. Let people see you're real, not just some story they can tell. Before Genevieve could respond, she heard Lawson's voice. Sarah Mitchell, are you harassing my house guest? He'd come around the side of the house, and despite the stern words, there was warmth in his expression. Sarah stood and hugged him without ceremony, and Lawson hugged back, looking slightly uncomfortable but pleased. Someone has to teach this girl how things work around here, Sarah said. Can't leave it all to you. You'll have her thinking everyone out here is as antisocial as you are. I'm not antisocial. I'm selective. That's just a fancy word for antisocial. She turned to Genevieve. There's a barn dance this Saturday in town. Nothing fancy, just folks getting together after the spring planting. You should come, both of you. Lawson's expression closed off immediately. I don't do dances. You did when Caroline was alive. That was different. Why? Because she demanded it. Sarah's voice gentled. Lawson, you can't hide out here forever. And Genevieve needs to meet people, make connections. This isn't Chicago. Out here, your neighbors are your lifeline. Genevieve saw the conflict in Lawson's face, the desire to refuse warring with the knowledge that Sarah was right. She stood brushing crumbs from her skirt. We'll think about it, she said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. We? Yes, we. Genevieve looked at Lawson. Sarah's right. If I'm going to stay here even temporarily, I need to stop hiding. And maybe you do too. Lawson stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Fine. We'll go to the damn dance. Sarah laughed, delighted. That's the spirit. I'll see you both Saturday. And Genevieve. She swung back into her saddle with easy grace. Welcome to Montana, the territory that chews people up and spits them out. But if you survive it, there's nowhere else you'd rather be. She rode off, leaving Genevieve and Lawson standing on the porch. I'm sorry, Genevieve said. I shouldn't have agreed without asking you first. No, you were right. He rubbed the back of his neck. I have been hiding, and it's not fair to you. He looked at her. But I need you to understand something. I'm not good at this, at being social, at making small talk, at dancing. Caroline used to get so frustrated with me at these things. Then we'll be uncomfortable together. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm not good at it either. We can stand in the corner and judge everyone else. That surprised a laugh out of him. Deal. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Genevieve had nothing appropriate to wear to a dance, so Lawson rode into town and came back with fabric, simple cotton, in deep green and thread. She spent 2 evenings by lamplight cutting and sewing her fingers, remembering skills her mother had taught her years ago. The dress wouldn't be fancy, but it would be hers. The first new thing she'd owned in over a year. Lawson watched her work sometimes, not saying anything, just keeping her company. They'd fallen into an evening routine after dinner. She'd sew or read from one of the few books he owned, and he'd work on small repairs, or just sit by the fire. The silence between them comfortable now, instead of awkward. On Friday evening, she held up the finished dress. What do you think? Lawson looked up from the bridle he was mending. It's perfect. You didn't even really look at it. I don't need to. If you made it, it's perfect. The simple confidence in his voice made her throat tight. She folded the dress carefully and set it aside for tomorrow. Lawson. What was Caroline like? Really like? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, beautiful, charming, everything I wasn't. She could walk into a room and everyone would turn to look at her. She could make conversation with anyone about anything. She made people feel special just by talking to them. You loved her. I thought I did. But looking back, I think I was dazzled by her, by the fact that someone like her would choose someone like me. He set down the bridle. She wanted me to be different, more talkative, more social, more interested in the things she cared about. And I tried. God, I tried. But I couldn't be what she needed. And eventually she stopped pretending it was enough. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I knew what she wanted. I knew what would make her happy. I just couldn't give it to her. Genevieve set down her sewing. Or maybe she knew what you were and married you anyway, hoping she could change you. That's not love, Lawson. That's a project. He looked at her sharply. You don't know that. Don't I? My stepfather married my mother thinking he could mold her into what he wanted, quiet, obedient, grateful. When she stayed strong and independent, he resented her. When she died, he turned that resentment on me. She met his eyes. People who try to change you don't love you. They love the idea of you. There's a difference. Lawson stood abruptly and moved to the window, staring out at the dark prairie. Then what is love, if it's not trying to make each other better? Maybe it's accepting each other as you are. Maybe it's working together instead of trying to fix each other. She joined him at the window. I don't know, Lawson. I've never experienced it. But I know what it's not, and what Caroline wanted from you that wasn't it. They stood there in the lamplight, shoulders almost touching, and Genevieve felt something shift again. Something deeper than trust. Something that felt like the beginning of understanding. I'm scared about tomorrow, she admitted quietly. Me too. What are you scared of? That everyone will look at me and see failure. That they'll look at you and make assumptions. That I'll let you down somehow. He turned to face her. What are you scared of? That I won't belong. That I'll say the wrong thing, or wear the wrong dress, or stand the wrong way, and everyone will know I'm not good enough to be here. She swallowed hard. That Malcolm Turner will be there, and I'll have to face him again. If he's there, if he tries anything, I know. You'll protect me. She smiled slightly. But I can't hide behind you forever, Lawson. Eventually I have to learn to stand on my own. You're already standing on your own. You've been doing it for years. No, I've been running. There's a difference. She took a breath. But tomorrow at that dance, I'm going to stop running. I'm going to walk in there with my head up and claim my place. Even if I'm terrified. Even if I don't belong. You do belong. How do you know? Because you're here. Because you survived. Because you're brave enough to try. His voice was rough. That's more than most people can say. Saturday dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for a dance. Genevieve spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, cleaning things that were already clean, checking and rechecking her dress braiding, and rebraiding her hair, until Lawson finally told her gently that she looked fine. That everything would be fine, that they'd go, and if it was terrible, they'd leave. They set out in the late afternoon, Lawson driving the wagon, Genevieve beside him in her new green dress and a borrowed shawl. The ride to town took an hour, and they spent most of it in silence, both too nervous to make conversation. As they got closer, they could hear music drifting across the prairie, fiddle and guitar, laughter and voices. The barn where the dance was being held sat on the edge of town, already surrounded by wagons and horses. Lawson pulled up and sat there for a moment, his hands tight on the reins. We don't have to do this, Genevieve said. Yes, we do. He climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. His hands were warm and steady on her waist. Ready? No, you. Not even close. He offered his arm. "Let's do it anyway." They walked toward the barn together, and Genevieve felt every eye turn toward them. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The music faltered. For one horrible moment she thought they'd made a terrible mistake. Then Sarah Mitchell appeared, smiling wide, and broke the spell. "There you are. I was starting to think you'd chickened out." She linked arms with Genevieve, drawing her forward. "Come on, I'll introduce you around. And Lawson, go get yourself and the lady some punch. You look like you're about to face a firing squad." And just like that, they were absorbed into the crowd, into the warmth and noise and life of a Montana barn dance. It wasn't easy. Genevieve stumbled over names and faces, felt the weight of curious and sometimes hostile stares, saw the whispers behind hands. But Lawson was there, a steady presence at her side. And Sarah was there, fierce and protective. And slowly, gradually, people started to see her not as scandal or gossip, but as a woman, just a woman trying to find her place. When the fiddle player struck up a waltz, Lawson appeared at her elbow. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. She let him lead her onto the floor, and when his hand settled at her waist and hers on his shoulder, something clicked into place. They moved together awkwardly at first, then easier, finding a rhythm that was theirs alone. "You're doing fine," he murmured. "So are you." "I hate dancing." "I know. But this—" He looked down at her. "This isn't so bad." She smiled up at him, and in that moment, spinning in a drafty barn, in the middle of Montana territory, surrounded by strangers who were maybe possibly starting to become something more, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The waltz ended, and Lawson led Genevieve off the floor, his hand lingering at the small of her back longer than necessary. She felt the warmth of his palm through the thin fabric of her dress, and something fluttered in her chest, something dangerous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "You want some air?" he asked quietly. She nodded suddenly, overwhelmed by the heat and noise and too many eyes watching them. They slipped out the side door into the cool evening, and Genevieve leaned against the barn wall, breathing deep. "That was a lot," Lawson finished. "Yeah." They stood there in the twilight, listening to music drift through the walls. Genevieve closed her eyes, letting her heart beat slow, and when she opened them again, Lawson was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just you did good in there. Better than good. I barely said 3 words to anyone except Sarah. You showed up, you held your head high. You let them see you." He moved closer. "That takes courage, Genevieve." Before she could respond, the barn door opened and a man stepped out. He was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and an easy smile that faltered when he saw them. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt." He started to go back inside, but Lawson stopped him. "You're not interrupting, Tom. Just getting some air." The young man, Tom, nodded, then his eyes landed on Genevieve. "You must be Miss Prescott. I'm Tom Henderson. I work the land south of Lawson's place." Genevieve shook his offered hand. "Genevieve. Just Genevieve." "Well, just Genevieve, welcome to Montana." His smile returned, genuine and warm. "If you need anything at all, my place is about 3 miles south. Doors always open." "Thank you." Tom tipped his hat and went back inside, and Genevieve turned to find Lawson's jaw tight, his expression closed off. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "Lawson." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Tom Henderson is a good man. Young, handsome, owns his own land. No failed marriage. No damage." His voice was carefully neutral. "If you were interested—" Genevieve felt something hot flash through her. "Are you seriously trying to set me up with your neighbor?" "I'm just saying you have options. You don't have to—" He stopped, jaw working. "You don't have to stay with me out of gratitude or obligation." "Is that what you think? That I'm staying because I feel obligated? Aren't you?" She stared at him, this infuriating, damaged, beautiful man who couldn't see what was right in front of him. You're an idiot, Lawson Reed. He looked startled. What? I'm not staying because I'm grateful. I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go. I'm staying because... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Because what? Because in 2 weeks, he'd made her feel safer than she'd felt in 6 years. Because his silence felt like home instead of absence. Because when he looked at her, she felt seen instead of judged. Because why? His voice was rough. Because I want to. She said it simply, honestly. Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing where I am and who I'm with. And I choose this. I choose you. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Genevieve. The barn door slammed open again, and this time it was Sarah, her face tight with concern. Lawson, you need to get inside, now. They followed her back into the barn, and Genevieve felt her stomach drop when she saw Malcolm Turner standing in the middle of the dance floor. He was drunk, not falling down drunk, but mean drunk, the kind that made men do stupid, violent things. And he was talking loud enough for everyone to hear. All I'm saying is, it's peculiar, isn't it? A man like Lawson Reed, living alone all these years, suddenly taking in a woman. A strange woman. A woman who was supposed to be mine. He laughed ugly and sharp. Makes you wonder what kind of arrangement they have. The music had stopped. Everyone was watching. Lawson moved forward, but Genevieve caught his arm. Don't. He wants you to react. Don't give him the satisfaction. He's talking about you like you're... I know what he's doing. She squeezed his arm. Let me handle this. Before he could argue, she walked onto the dance floor. Every eye in the barn followed her, but for once, the attention didn't make her want to disappear. It made her angry. Mr. Turner, she said clearly, I believe you have something to say to me. Malcolm turned, swaying slightly. Up close, he was worse than she'd imagined from his letters, weak chin, bloodshot eyes, mouth twisted in perpetual bitterness. This was the man she'd crossed 2,000 miles for. This was the man who'd promised her partnership and respect. Miss Prescott. He tried for charm and missed by a mile. I've been looking for you. We have unfinished business, you and I. No, we don't. You made that clear when you had me dumped at your gate like unwanted cargo. I had a moment of doubt. Surely you can forgive that. After all, we barely knew each other. He moved closer, and she smelled whiskey and something sour underneath. But I'm willing to give you another chance. We can start over. Forget this unfortunate misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Genevieve kept her voice level, loud enough for everyone to hear. You abandoned me. You left me stranded with no money, no resources, no way back. And the only reason I'm not dead or worse is because Lawson Reed is a better man than you'll ever be. Malcolm's face flushed dark red. Now see here. No, you see here. She took a step forward, and he actually stepped back. I came here believing your letters, believing your promises about partnership and respect. And you know what I found? A coward who couldn't even face me himself, who sent a wagon driver with a note like I was a package being returned. I had every right to change my mind. You did, but you didn't have the right to leave me stranded. You didn't have the right to talk about me like I'm property you decided you didn't want anymore. Her voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. I am not your business, unfinished or otherwise. I never was. Because you never saw me as a person, just an idea. A convenient solution to your loneliness that you discarded the moment it became real. The barn was dead silent. Malcolm opened his mouth, closed it. Tried again. You're living with him. Everyone knows it. You're his... I'm his what? His employee? Yes. His friend, maybe. His business, absolutely not yours. She drew herself up to her full height. I work for my keep. I sleep in the house, he sleeps in the barn. We work together, eat together, and mind our own business. If that offends your delicate sensibilities, Mr. Turner, I suggest you go back to Helena and drink yourself into forgetting I exist, because I've already forgotten you." She turned and walked away, her legs shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. The crowd parted for her, and she didn't look left or right, just kept walking until she was outside again, gulping air like she'd been underwater. Lawson was there a second later, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "You're shaking." "I'm angry." She looked up at him. "I'm so angry I can barely breathe." "You were magnificent." "I was terrified." "You were both." He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean against his chest, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek. "He's leaving. Sarah's husband is escorting him out." "Good." She pulled back enough to look at him. "I meant what I said in there. Every word." "I know." His hands came up to frame her face, gentle and sure. "And I'm done sleeping in the barn." Her breath caught. "Lawson, I'll build a second bedroom. Proper walls, proper door. It won't be charity or improper or anything, except what it is, two people choosing to share a home." His eyes searched hers. "If that's what you want." "It's what I want." She said it without hesitation. "But people will still talk." "Let them talk. I'm done living my life based on other people's opinions." He smiled slightly. "You taught me that." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, and Genevieve felt something shift inside her, some last wall crumbling, some last fear releasing its grip. Inside, the music started again. Someone laughed. Life went on. "We should go back in," she said. "Or we could go home." Home. The word landed soft and sure between them. "Yeah," she said. "Let's go home." The ride back was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Genevieve sat close to Lawson on the wagon bench, their shoulders touching, and watched stars scatter across the Montana sky. She'd never seen so many stars in Chicago, the city lights drowned them out. But here, they filled the darkness with cold fire, and she felt small and vast all at once. "What are you thinking?" Lawson asked. "That I've never seen stars like this. That Chicago feels like a different lifetime. That I'm sitting in a wagon next to a man I've known for 2 weeks, and it feels more real than anything I've experienced in 6 years. That scare you?" "Terrifies me." She looked at him. "But I'm done running from things that scare me." They arrived home after midnight. Lawson unhitched the horses while Genevieve went inside and built up the fire. When he came in, she was standing at the stove heating water for tea. "You don't have to wait up," he said. "I'm not tired." She wasn't. The confrontation with Malcolm had left her wired, every nerve alive. "Besides, we should talk. About the bedroom. About what comes next." He poured them both tea, and they sat at the table, the lamp burning low between them. "I'll start building tomorrow," he said. "Should take maybe 2 weeks if the weather holds. Until then, things stay as they are. You in the house, me in the barn." "That seems proper. Safe." He met her eyes. "I'm not trying to rush anything, Genevieve. I'm just trying to make a space where you can stay if you want to, where you can build the life you talked about without worrying about appearances or judgment." "And what about you? What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stop being alone. I want to stop punishing myself for Caroline leaving. I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want to wake up and hear someone else moving around the house. I want to share meals and work and silence with someone who understands that silence isn't absence, it's just being." "I understand that." "I know you do." He reached across the table and took her hand. "That's why this works. That's why I'm willing to let people talk and Malcolm Turner make a fool of himself and the whole territory gossip. Because for the first time in 8 years, I feel like I'm living instead of just surviving." Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes. "Me too." They sat there holding hands across the table until the tea grew cold and the lamp burned low. Then Lawson walked her to the bedroom door, hesitated, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Genevieve." "Good night, Lawson." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart full of things she didn't have names for yet. Through the walls, she heard him banking the fire, checking the locks, preparing to head out to the barn. And for the first time since arriving in Montana, she didn't feel guilty about taking his bed. She felt home. The next morning, Lawson started building. He measured and cut, lumber hammered and sawed, his movements economical and sure. Genevieve worked alongside him, when she could, holding boards, steady passing tools, learning the rhythm of construction. "Where did you learn to build?" she asked. "My father. He was a carpenter before he became a farmer." Lawson lined up another board. "Said a man who couldn't build his own shelter wasn't much of a man. Spent my whole childhood learning to measure twice and cut once." "Did he teach your brother too?" "Tried to. James wasn't interested. He wanted to work with numbers, with money. Ended up back east working in a bank." Lawson hammered a nail home. "We write occasionally. He thinks I'm crazy for staying out here." "Are you?" "Probably." He looked up at her, squinting against the sun. "But it's my kind of crazy, and that's worth something." They worked through the morning, and by afternoon, the frame was taking shape. It wasn't big, just enough space for a bed and a dresser, a window facing east. But it was solid, built to last, and Genevieve felt something warm bloom in her chest every time she looked at it. Sarah Mitchell rode up around 3, her saddlebags bulging. "Brought supplies," she announced, dismounting. "Heard about last night. Figured you could use some reinforcements." She unpacked food: bread, cheese, smoked ham, a pie that smelled like heaven. Then she produced fabric, needles, thread. "For curtains," she said to Genevieve. "Can't have a proper bedroom without curtains." "Sarah, you didn't have to. I wanted to." Sarah's expression was serious. "What you did last night took guts, standing up to Malcolm Turner like that in front of everyone. You earned some respect, girl, even from the folks who wanted to disapprove." "Really? Really?" Mary Henderson. "Tom's mother said you reminded her of herself when she first came out here. Said it takes a special kind of strong to face down a man like that." Sarah grinned. "And old Mrs. Patterson, who hasn't approved of anything since 1860, said you had backbone. Coming from her, that's practically a blessing." Genevieve felt something loosen in her chest. "I was so scared I thought I might throw up." Fear and courage aren't opposites. Courage is being scared and doing it anyway. Sarah looked at the bedroom frame. "Lawson building you a room." "He's building me options," Genevieve said carefully. Sarah studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Good. You both deserve options." She stayed for an hour, helping measure fabric, gossiping about town, making Genevieve laugh with stories about various neighbors. When she left, she hugged Genevieve hard. "You're going to be fine," she said. "Both of you." The days fell into rhythm after that. Lawson worked on the bedroom every spare moment, and it rose from the ground like something inevitable. Genevieve tended the garden, managed the house, learned to ride one of the horses, a gentle mare named Bess, who tolerated her fumbling with patient good humor. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch and watch the sun paint the prairie in impossible colors. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence. And slowly, gradually, the space between them began to feel less like distance and more like possibility. 2 weeks after the dance, Tom Henderson rode up with a wagon full of furniture. "My mother's contribution," he said, climbing down. She heard about the new room and insisted. Said a proper bedroom needs a proper bed frame. Lawson helped him unload not just a bed frame, but a dresser, a small table, even a rocking chair that had seen better days, but was still solid. "Your mother shouldn't have gone to this trouble," Genevieve said. "Try telling her that." Tom grinned. She said any woman brave enough to tell off Malcolm Turner deserves a decent place to sleep. They got everything set up, and Genevieve stood in the doorway of her new room, her room with 4 walls and a door and a window that caught the morning light. The bed frame waited for a mattress. The dresser stood empty, but it was hers. "What do you think?" Lawson asked from behind her. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she was learning to recognize, careful hope mixed with fear of disappointment. "It's perfect," she said honestly. Thank you. Thank me by using it, by staying. His voice was rough. By choosing this every day until it stops being a choice and starts being just life. She moved to him, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. It was the first time she'd initiated touch, and she felt him freeze, then carefully, slowly wrap his arms around her. They stood there in the doorway of the unfinished room holding each other, and Genevieve felt something click into place. Not love. Not yet. They were both too damaged for that to come easy. But something just as important. Partnership. Trust. The beginning of home. That night, Genevieve moved her few belongings into the new room. Lawson brought in the mattress from his bed. "I'll get a new one for myself," he insisted, and helped her make it up with fresh linens. When everything was arranged, he stood at the door. "You need anything else?" "No, it's more than I ever expected." He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Genevieve, what you said at the dance about choosing me, did you mean it? Every word. Even though I'm damaged, even though I'm quiet and stubborn and probably always will be." She moved to the door, stopping just short of touching him. "Especially because of that. Because you're real, Lawson. You don't pretend to be something you're not. You don't make promises you can't keep. And you—" She took a breath. "You see me. All of me. The scared parts, and the angry parts, and the parts that are still learning how to be brave. And you don't try to fix me. You just stand beside me." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I'm falling for you. I need you to know that. I'm falling for you, and it scares the hell out of me, and I don't know how to do this without messing it up." "Then we'll mess it up together." She leaned into his touch. "And we'll figure it out as we go." He kissed her, then soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were. But broken things could still hold each other up. Broken things could still be beautiful. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "Good night, Genevieve." "Good night, Lawson." He left, and she heard him moving around the main room, preparing for bed, in his own space for the first time in weeks. She climbed into her bed, pulled the quilt up, and stared at the ceiling of her room. Her room. In her home. With a man who was becoming more than a friend, more than a rescuer, more than a temporary solution. He was becoming hers, and she was becoming his, and that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Outside, an owl called. The wind whispered through the grass. And Genevieve closed her eyes and slept in her own bed, in her own room, for the first time in 6 years. She slept through the night without waking once. Summer arrived in full force, turning the prairie gold and bringing heat that shimmered off the land like water. Genevieve woke each morning to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of Lawson already working outside. She'd dress quickly, splash water on her face, and join him for coffee on the porch before the day's work began. They'd fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. She'd tend the garden while he worked the fences. They'd break for lunch together, eating in companionable silence or easy conversation. Afternoons were for harder work, harvesting, preserving, preparing for the winter that would come all too soon. And evenings were theirs, sitting on the porch, watching the sun set, talking or not talking, just being together. 3 months had passed since that night at the dance, since the kiss that had changed everything and nothing. They hadn't kissed again, though Genevieve felt the pull of it every time Lawson looked at her a certain way. Every time his hand brushed hers, passing tools or plates. They were dancing around something, both of them too careful, too damaged, too afraid of breaking what they'd built. It was Sarah who finally called them on it. She rode up one Saturday morning, took one look at them working side by side in the garden, careful not to touch, careful to maintain distance, and shook her head. "You two are the most stubborn people I've ever met," she announced. Lawson looked up from the tomato plants. "What are we being stubborn about? Each other." Sarah dismounted and tied her horse. "You're in love with her, she's in love with you, and you're both tiptoeing around it like you're afraid the whole thing will explode if you admit it." "Sarah, Genevieve started. Don't Sarah me. I've watched you two for 3 months now. I've seen the way you look at him when he's not watching. I've seen the way he finds excuses to be near you. And I'm tired of watching you waste time being careful when life's too short for careful. Lawson stood brushing dirt from his hands. It's not that simple. Why not? You care about her. She cares about you. What's complicated about that? Everything. Genevieve's voice was quiet. We're damaged, Sarah. We've both been hurt, and if we try this and it fails, then it fails, and you'll both survive same as you survived everything else. Sarah's expression softened. But what if it doesn't fail? What if you're both so busy protecting yourselves that you miss the chance at something real? She left them standing in the garden, her words hanging in the air like heat shimmer. That evening they sat on the porch as usual, but the silence felt different, weighted, full of things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Lawson spoke. She's not wrong. I know. I am in love with you. Have been for weeks, maybe longer. He kept his eyes on the horizon. And it terrifies me. Because Caroline... I'm not Caroline. Genevieve said it firmly. I'm not going to leave because you're quiet, or because Montana's hard, or because you can't give me parties and society. I came here for those things and realized I never wanted them in the first place. Then what do you want? This. She gestured at the ranch, the prairie, the endless sky. Work, purpose, partnership, and you. She turned to look at him. I want you, Lawson, all of you. The silence and the stubbornness and the damage. I want to build a life here with you, and I'm tired of being careful about it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't know how to do this right. I failed once already. So did I. I trusted Malcolm Turner's letters. I trusted my stepfather not to hurt me. I've failed at judgment before. She moved closer. But I'm done letting fear of failure stop me from trying. Because you know what's worse than trying and failing? Never trying at all. Lawson turned to face her fully. If we do this, if we really do this, I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll tell me if you're unhappy. That you won't just disappear one day like Caroline did. That if this stops working, we'll talk about it. His voice was rough. I can handle a lot of things, Genevieve, but I can't handle waking up one day and finding you gone. I promise. She took his hand. And you promise me something too. Promise me you won't hold back waiting for me to leave. Promise me you'll let yourself be happy. Because you deserve that, Lawson. You deserve to be more than just careful. He pulled her closer, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't careful. It was sure and deep and full of 3 months of wanting. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and felt something inside her finally settle. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lawson rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Genevieve pulled back, startled. What? Marry me. Not because it's proper, or because people expect it, because I want to. Because I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep next to you and build this life together officially. He cupped her face. Because I love you, and I'm done being careful about it. We've only known each other 3 months. I know, and if you need more time, I understand. But I've spent 8 years being alone, being careful, being afraid. And then you showed up at Malcolm Turner's gate and everything changed. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. So yes, it's fast. Yes, it's probably crazy. But I'm asking anyway. Marry me, Genevieve. She thought about Chicago, about her stepfather's hands on her door, about selling her mother's ring and boarding a train to nowhere. She thought about standing at that gate abandoned and terrified, and watching Lawson walk toward her like salvation she hadn't known she needed. She thought about these 3 months, learning to ride, learning to garden, learning to sleep through the night without fear, learning that silence could be companionship instead of loneliness, learning that damaged people could still build something whole. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." This time when he kissed her, she tasted salt and realized one of them was crying. Maybe both of them. They were married 3 weeks later under the cottonwood tree with Sarah and her husband as witnesses and half the territory in attendance. Genevieve wore a new dress, white cotton with blue flowers that Sarah had helped her sew. Lawson wore his Sunday suit and looked terrified and happy in equal measure. The preacher kept it simple, talking about partnership and commitment and the sanctity of choosing each other every day. When it came time for vows, Lawson spoke first. "I promise to work beside you, not ahead of you. I promise to tell you when I'm scared instead of hiding it. I promise to see you, all of you, and love what I see." His voice was steady. "And I promise that you'll always have a home with me for as long as you want it." Genevieve's voice shook when she responded. "I promise to choose you every day. I promise to tell you the truth even when it's hard. I promise to build this life with you, not just live in it." She squeezed his hands. "And I promise I'm not going anywhere. This is home. Your home." When the preacher pronounced them married, the crowd cheered. Sarah cried. Tom Henderson's mother produced pies from nowhere, and Lawson kissed his wife like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, because she was. The celebration lasted until dark, and by the time everyone left, Genevieve was exhausted and exhilarated. She stood in the yard watching the last wagon disappear, and Lawson came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You all right?" he murmured against her hair. "Better than all right." She leaned back against him. "I'm married. To you. That's terrifying. Amazing." She turned in his arms. 3 months ago, I had nothing. No home, no money, no hope. And now I have everything. You always had everything. He kissed her forehead. You just needed a place to see it. They went inside together, and for the first time, Genevieve walked into her bedroom, their bedroom now with Lawson's things beside hers, without fear or hesitation. This was home. This was marriage. This was the life she'd crossed 2,000 miles hoping to find. And it was better than any letter, any promise, any dream could have been. That first year was hard. Montana didn't care that they were newlyweds or that they were still learning each other's rhythms. Winter came early and stayed late, testing them with cold that cut to the bone and snow that buried everything. They learned to work together in close quarters, learned each other's moods and needs, learned when to talk, and when to simply hold each other in the dark. Spring brought new challenges, a difficult calving season, a late frost that killed half the garden, a bout of illness that left Genevieve weak for weeks. But Lawson was there through all of it, steady and patient, and she learned that marriage wasn't about perfect moments. It was about showing up for each other in the imperfect ones. By their first anniversary, they'd settled into something solid, not effortless. They still fought occasionally, still had days when the silence felt heavy instead of comfortable, but real. Built on work and honesty and the daily choice to stay. Sarah visited often, bringing gossip and advice in equal measure. Tom Henderson stopped by when he needed help with his own ranch, and slowly Genevieve built friendships with other women in the territory. She learned their names, their stories, their struggles. And she learned that survival out here meant community, meant helping each other through the hard times. Malcolm Turner had left for California within a month of the wedding, and good riddance. Occasionally Genevieve thought about the letters he'd written, the promises he'd made, and felt nothing but pity for a man who'd been too afraid to choose real over easy. 2 years after the wedding, Genevieve realized she was pregnant. She told Lawson on a Sunday morning, nervous and excited and terrified all at once. He'd stared at her for a long moment, then swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "Are you happy?" she asked when he finally set her down. "Happy doesn't cover it." He kissed her hard. Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed, but happy most of all. "Good, because I'm all of those things too." Their daughter was born the following spring, a screaming bundle of dark hair and determination that they named Rose after Genevieve's mother. Lawson held her like she might break his big hands, impossibly gentle, and Genevieve watched her careful, quiet husband transform into a father who sang lullabies at 3 in the morning and built a cradle so beautiful it belonged in a museum. 2 years later came their son James, named for Lawson's brother. He was easier than Rose, content to observe the world with solemn eyes that reminded Genevieve of his father. And watching Lawson with both children patient and loving and fully present, she felt something in her chest expand until it hurt. This was what she'd been searching for in those letters from Malcolm Turner. Not romance or rescue, but partnership. Not perfection, but presence. Not promises, but proof, daily constant proof that she was chosen, she was seen, she was home. The years passed like seasons, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. They expanded the ranch, brought in more cattle, built a proper barn that didn't leak when it rained. Sarah's children and theirs grew up together, running wild across the prairie. The territory changed too, more families arriving, a proper school being built, the railroad pushing closer. But through it all, the core of their life remained the same. Work and silence, and the daily choice to build something together. On their 10th anniversary, Lawson took Genevieve out to the cottonwood tree where they'd married. The children were with Sarah for the night, and they had the ranch to themselves, a rare luxury. "I've been thinking," he said, pulling her close. "That's dangerous." He smiled, the expression coming easier now after years of practice. "I've been thinking about that first day, when I saw you at Turner's Gate. The worst day of my life. The best day of mine." He kissed her temple. "Because I could have walked away. I could have minded my own business, told myself it wasn't my problem. But something made me walk toward you instead. Decency. Honor. Those things you pretend you don't have, but show every single day. Maybe. Or maybe it was fate. Maybe you were always supposed to end up here with me building this." He gestured at the ranch, the life they'd created. Maybe Malcolm Turner's cowardice was actually the bravest thing he ever did, because it brought you to me. Genevieve leaned back to look at him. "You really believe that in fate?" "I believe in you. I believe in us. I believe that damaged people can heal each other if they're willing to be patient." He cupped her face. "And I believe that love isn't something you find. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice, until one day you look around and realize you've built a whole life." She kissed him, then tasting salt and sweetness, and 10 years of choosing each other. When they broke apart, the sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me at that gate, for not walking away, for building this life with me." She took his hand. "For being exactly who you are, instead of who I thought I needed." They stood there under the cottonwood as stars began to emerge, two people who'd been abandoned and broken and lost, who'd found each other and built something whole. Years later, when Rose asked her mother how she'd known Lawson was the right person, Genevieve thought carefully before answering. "I didn't," she said honestly. "Not at first. He was just a stranger who offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. But he kept showing up. Every day, in every small way, he kept choosing me. And I kept choosing him back. And eventually, those daily choices became a life." "But how did you know you loved him?" Genevieve looked out at the orchard they'd planted together, the trees heavy with fruit, and smiled. "Love isn't something you know, it's something you do. It's showing up when things are hard. It's working together even when you're tired. It's choosing to stay when leaving would be easier." She looked at her daughter. "Your father and I didn't fall in love. We built it. And that's stronger than any fall could ever be." Rose seemed to consider this. "And you never wanted to leave, never thought about what your life could have been somewhere else." "Every life has moments of doubt. But no, I never wanted to leave. Because this—" She gestured at the ranch, the prairie, the vast Montana sky. "This is exactly where I was always supposed to be. I just had to be abandoned at a gate to find it." When Lawson and Genevieve were old, when their children had children of their own, they still sat on that porch every evening watching the sun set. Their hands were weathered now, lined with age and work, but they still fit together perfectly. "Do you ever think about that day?" Lawson asked one evening. "The day you showed up at Turner's Gate." "Every day." Genevieve squeezed his hand. "Best worst day of my life." "Mine too." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to rose to purple. Somewhere in the orchard, their grandchildren played. In the house, their daughter was making dinner. Their son was checking the cattle with his own children. The ranch they'd built together hummed with life and love and continuation. "We did good," Lawson said quietly. "We did." Genevieve agreed. And sitting there with her hand in his, watching the sun paint the prairie in fire and shadow, Genevieve thought about the girl she'd been scared and desperate standing at a locked gate with nothing but 2 carpet bags and a broken dream. She thought about the man who'd seen her and walked toward her instead of away. She thought about all the daily choices, the small moments, the hard work and honest words that had built this life. She'd come to Montana looking for rescue and found something better: partnership. She'd sought safety and discovered strength. She'd wanted belonging and built a home. Real love, she'd learned, wasn't found in pretty letters or grand promises. It was built in silence and work, in showing up and choosing each other, in the daily decision to stay when leaving would be easier. It was 2 damaged people learning to be whole together, not despite their brokenness, but because of it. And sitting there with the man who'd given her shelter and built her a room and loved her without trying to fix her, Genevieve knew with absolute certainty that she'd gotten exactly what she'd always needed, even if it looked nothing like what she'd thought she wanted. The sun dropped below the horizon. Stars emerged, and Lawson pulled her closer, both of them watching darkness transform into light, the way they'd done for 40 years, the way they'd do for however many years remained. Because this was home. This was love. This was the life they'd built together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And it was more than enough. It was everything.